Good afternoon and welcome to the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library and to the 2016 PEN Hemingway Award ceremony, the 40th anniversary of the bestowing of this literary award. I'm David Ferriero, the Archivist of the United States, and it's a pleasure to welcome you to my house today. My house, in that this library is one of more than 40 facilities that make up the National Archives and Records Administration. So complicated I can't even remember its title. 13, soon to be 14 presidential libraries are part of the National Archives. And this is a very special treat for me, both personally and professionally. Having grown up in Beverly, Massachusetts, not far from here, having studied at Northeastern and Simmons and launched my library career at MIT, where I was Sue Miller's librarian, I'm always happy to come home to Boston. It's a special honor to be with you in what has become an annual rite of spring, recognizing emerging writers and their talent. Those who keep up with me through my blog, Ottessa, and have clicked on my What I'm Reading button will know that my passion for fiction is well known, especially new and emerging writers. I came to the New York Library I came to the National Archives from the New York Public Library, where in my spare time I served as a reader for the Young Lions Fiction Award, a very similar award. So this has very special personal and professional meaning to me. The National Archives abounds in historical treasures, yet in terms of literary significance, none compare with the Ernest Hemingway collection that was donated to the American people by Hemingway's fourth wife, Mary, to be housed here at the Kennedy Library at the invitation of Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis. It was also Mary Hemingway who 40 years ago launched the PEN Hemingway Award for the best book of American debut fiction, which is our reason for gathering here today. Let me be among the first to congratulate our honorees. When the library first opened in 1979 and the Hemingway Room was officially dedicated, the Hemingway family was represented by Ernest's second son, Patrick, who, along with his wife, Carol, have been the primary stewards of this magnificent collection, providing us with wisdom, generosity, and direction and financial support. And we are deeply in their debt. And as the Archivist of the United States, I want to publicly express my appreciation for their years of unwavering dedication and care. Patrick has also played a key role in making the materials housed here, his father's letters, manuscripts, and ephemera, more accessible to the public. For example, he serves as the key advisor to the Hemingway Letters Project. He edited True at First Light, an unpublished novel based on Hemingway's 1953 Safari, and he works closely with his nephew Sean on the publication of the newly restored library editions of Hemingway's best-known works, such as The Sun Also Rises, A Farewell to Arms, and most recently, Green Hills of Africa. These volumes not only feature Hemingway's masterpieces as originally published, but also include appendices highlighting earlier drafts and edited manuscripts, which offer readers insight into Hemingway's creative process. Patrick's unique understanding of his father's works set in Africa may stem from his own life experience. After graduating from Harvard, Patrick moved to Tanganyika, where he lived and worked for 25 years as a big game hunter, safari business owner, and wildlife management expert and instructor. Since returning to the United States in the 1970s, he has lived and fished and hunted in Montana, where he also revels in mathematical and scientific pursuits and manages the intellectual property of his father's estate. In his foreword to the newest Hemingway Library edition, published just months ago, Patrick writes, "Green Hills of Africa, like Gaul, is divided into parts, specifically 4 pursuits, of which the last is pursuit of happiness. The American reader will recognize this rearrangement of Jefferson's elegant phrase. He goes on in his essay to describe his boyhood home in Key West as filled with Papa's trophy mounts of buffalo, lion, great kudu, and other antelope tastefully distributed by my mother throughout every room in the house. In the bedroom I shared with my younger brother Gregory, it was a wildebeest, which made East Africa my promised land. And he concludes his introduction by writing, "But then, who of us hasn't had a promised land, caught up with happiness, the constant nymph, and run with her swiftly through the green birch forest of Arden, only to trip and fall and watch her disappear into the trees without a backward glance? So light a candle, love the light, and face the darkness when the candle fails." It has become a tradition for Patrick to share a brief reading at the ceremony, to bring Hemingway's voice to life and shine a candle on his father's words, which continue to speak to generations of readers, helping to light their way and at times to face the darkness. Ladies and gentlemen, to open this special 40th anniversary celebration, please join me in welcoming Patrick Hemingway.
As they say, a hard act to follow. The passage I've chosen this time is a sort of farewell, but it is, this was written by a young writer, 25 years old, describing an event that happened to him. It's certainly autobiographical as a child, and it's really the very first of the short stories in order that, aside from that publication, so many poems and stories and so forth, that was published in Europe. But this was his first publication, really, as a widely distributed book. It's called Indian Camp, and I think probably most of you are familiar with it. He's gone with his father, who's a doctor, specifically in obstetrics, to deliver the child of an Indian woman who's having difficulty in giving birth. And it's very clinically told and quite disturbing as a story. But the story is all over. The doctor has delivered the child, and the husband has committed suicide. "I'm terribly sorry I brought you along, Nicky," said his father, all his post-operative exhilaration gone. "It was an awful mess to put you through." "Do ladies always have such a hard time having babies?" Nick asked. "No, that was very, very exceptional." "Why did he kill himself, Daddy?" "I don't know, Nick. He couldn't stand things, I guess." "Do many men kill themselves, Daddy?" "Not very many, Nick." "Do many women?" "Hardly ever." "Don't they ever?" "Oh, yes, they do sometimes." "Daddy, yes." "Where did Uncle George go?" "He'll turn up all right." "Is dying hard, Daddy?" "No, I think it's pretty easy, Nick. It all depends." They were seated in the boat, Nick in the stern, his father rowing. The sun was coming up over the hills. A bass jumped, making a circle in the water. Nick trailed his hand in the water. It felt warm in the sharp chill of the morning. In the early morning, on the lake, sitting in the stern of the boat with his father rowing, he felt quite sure he would never die. I just want to add that in a literary sense, he achieved his aim.
Thank you, Patrick. What a special opportunity to hear you read your father's words. Good afternoon. I'm Jay Basanko, the Chief Operating Officer of the National Archives and Records Administration and the Acting Director of the Kennedy Library. On behalf of my colleagues, I thank you all for coming and acknowledge our partners for today's program, including PEN New England, the Hemingway Foundation and Society, the Lowell Institute, and WBUR. I would also like to thank the staff of the Kennedy Library and the Kennedy Foundation for their efforts in organizing today's event and their work in preserving and providing access to the Hemingway collection. And I'd also like to thank former Director Tom Putnam, without whose tireless efforts and leadership the exhibit we'll be seeing later today would not have been possible. We have all been introduced to Patrick. Allow me now to recognize other members of the Hemingway family who are here with us. Patrick's wife, Carol, his daughter, Mina, Colette Hemingway, who along with her husband, Sean, Ernest Hemingway's grandson, is the co-chair of the Hemingway Council, and Angela Hemingway Charles, who was married to Patrick's late brother, Jack, and her husband, Glenn. We are so pleased that all of you have joined us here this afternoon. Today, we celebrate not only the 40th anniversary of the PEN Hemingway Award, but also the opening of the first ever Hemingway exhibit at the Kennedy Library. Our curator, Stacy Bredhoff, will close today's speaking program and invite you all to be the first to see the show after this ceremony. On behalf of the National Archives, let me thank our collaborator in this venture, the Morgan Library Museum in New York City, and the co-curators of the original exhibit, Declan Kiley and Susan Wren. The PEN Hemingway Award recognizes new voices in American fiction, and I was struck when touring the exhibit this morning by the very first document on display. It is a letter that Hemingway wrote to his father at the age of 25, in which he articulates his artistic credo. Hemingway's parents had been shocked by the publication of In Our Times, his first collection of stories, some of which they found so troubling that they returned the 6 copies they had ordered, which Ernest references in the letter. The reason I have not sent you any of my recent work, he writes, is because you or mother sent back the In Our Times books that looked as though you did not want to see anymore. You see, in all my stories, I am trying to get the feeling of the actual life across, not just to depict life or criticize it, but to actually make it alive, so that when you have read something by me, you have actually experienced the thing. You can't do this without putting the bad and the ugly as well as what is beautiful, because if it is all beautiful, you can't believe it. Things aren't that way. So when you see anything of mine that you don't like, remember that I'm sincere in doing it, and I'm working towards something. If I write an ugly story that might be hateful to you or mother, the next one might be one that you will like exceedingly. The words on their own are powerful, seeing them on display in Hemingway's own hand doubly so. We know him now as a budding author on the cusp of literary immortality. Yet here we see him as a hopeful son seeking his father's approval. And one can imagine those very sheets of paper being held in his parents' trembling hands as they tried to understand their talented son's emerging artistry. The PEN Hemingway Award is bestowed annually for an author who has written the book, deemed by a panel of esteemed judges to be the best work of debut fiction published over the course of the past year. On behalf of the National Archives, the Kennedy Library, and the Hemingway Collection, we are honored to host this annual ceremony and to celebrate the work of Ernest Hemingway and the emerging artists who follow in his footsteps. Among them is our next speaker, Joshua Ferris, who won the 2008 PEN Hemingway Award for his first novel, Then We Came to the End. Since that time, Mr. Ferris has written numerous short stories and 2 novels. The most recent, To Rise Again at a Decent Hour, won the Dylan Thomas Award and was shortlisted for the Man Booker Prize. He served as one of this year's PEN Hemingway judges and will now, along with Patrick, bestow the awards to our honorees. Thank you.
Patrick, I'm so happy to have heard you read from that story because on Tuesday night, I read that story to my 6-year-old son, Cooper, as part of like a homework routine, and I had forgotten entirely that the man killed himself at the end. So when we got to the part where he says, "Nikki, I'm so awfully sorry to have brought you," I turned to Cooper and said, "Cooper, I'm awfully sorry to have read you this story." But he followed along, and he absolutely loved it. He knew exactly what was going on, and then we talked about death, and we had a wonderful conversation. And then he was like, "Can we please get back to math?" I'm awfully honored to be here and to be speaking to you. I was reminded of how I learned that I had won this award in 2008. I had come out of the apartment that morning and discovered that my car was gone, and I didn't know what had happened to it. It was a brand spanking new car, about 500 miles on it, most of which were accumulated going from one side of the street to the other in New York City. We were living in Brooklyn at the time. And I come back in and I say, "Elizabeth," to my wife, "the car seems to be gone." And she goes, "Oh my God, I never took care of those tickets." So through a series of administrative nightmares, we finally discovered that it's somewhere in the hinterlands of Queens, and we have to go all the way out there. And when we get there, we learn we owe the city of New York $1,200. And Elizabeth feels totally responsible for all of this because even though she was the one with the 9-to-5 job that was really more like midnight to 5 p.m. every day as a corporate lawyer, and I was the stay-at-home writer. Somehow she was responsible for taking care of our parking tickets. And she just feels terrible as she's writing the check at the same moment that I'm checking my phone and I see I have a message that I've won this award, and I turn to her and I say, "It's all going to be fine, darling." So I have the PEN Hemingway Award to thank not only really for a necessary infusion of cash, but also for my happy marriage, maybe. I do want to direct a couple of comments directly to you, Patrick, and to you, Carol. I probably did not have the presence of mind when I was up here in 2008 receiving this award to convey just how much it means to a young writer to be up here, to be commended for his or her work, and to get the kind of recognition that when you are an apprentice writer, you believe remains and will remain permanently out of reach. On the practical level, I suppose it is really great to get the money. For a young writer, money is essentially just time. It just translates to time. There aren't a lot of institutional supports there are some, but there aren't a lot, especially after you've graduated from graduate school. And to find yourself in possession of a few $1,000s, in this case, this year it's $25,000, it's an extraordinary amount of money. It's an extraordinary amount of money for anyone that is that young. But it basically translates, in the weird way of writers, into months that you may continue to work unimpeded, and that's extraordinarily important. But that is really only the practical element. Speaking less practically, but I think much more importantly, psychologically, it gives the young writer the validation that, as I mentioned, seems so out of reach and so important early on. It also aligns these writers. It aligned me, and I think it aligns everyone, every honoree of the prize, to your father and to his name and to a certain legacy that is without doubt one of the finest in American literature. I had the great good fortune of being taught by Jim Shepard, who's honored later on in the ceremony. I remember asking Jim at lunch or after a workshop at Beers at the bar, I said, "Jim, what's the best thing that's ever happened to you?" I don't actually remember how I phrased this, but I wanted to know what other than the actual work and the writing of books, was important to Jim. And Jim mentioned an important letter that he received from J.M. Coetzee, the South African writer, that came at a moment in time that he found, I think, it was welcome. And it was a validation of a sort that I think enlisted him as one among many writers who were doing important work. And this is about as good as close as it gets to a letter directly from Hemingway, of saying, I've got your back. And that's extraordinarily important, especially considering who we're speaking of. And then, even more than validation, I think it reaches into a deeper level of the psyche, of the writer's psyche. It gives confirmation it gives confirmation to that lonely task, which already sort of teeters right there on the brink of pathology, that it isn't isolated to the one mad individual. That's really important. So it was a great honor to judge this award, and it was a great amount of fun. And we read a lot of books, and a lot of good books. And I think I'd first really like to thank my co-judges, Alexandra Marshall and Jay Perini. I would also like to thank Helen Atwan and Karen Wolf for making the administration so incredibly seamless. We had a high accord here. I think if you put your ear to the ground and you listen, you can hear some horror stories about judges doing these awards and the infighting and the I'm never doing that thing again, that sort of thing. That was not the case here. There was great civility. It was remarkably easy, and it was essentially unanimous. So it's really something. I think our only regret is that we couldn't pull up those two finalists into the winner category, and we couldn't pull up the two honorable mentions into the winner category, and then pluck 2 or 3 books that didn't get mentioned at all up into the winner category, because we just had such a fine time with these books. So let me first announce our 2 honorable mentions. The first is Karim Dimechkie for Lifted by the Great Nothing. You can clap, I guess. And the second honorable mention is Chigozie Obioma for The Fisherman. Our first finalist is Sarah Hulse, who writes under the name S.M. Hulse, for Black River. The judges write about Black River. In Black River, S.M. Hulse puts forward a classic, almost biblical tale in which her characters must choose between good and evil, or deal with the chance that neither of those choices is either perfect or possible. Set in a heartbreakingly beautiful landscape from which her characters seem to emerge like outcrops of stone, this novel suggests that in order to move forward in life, one must re-examine the past without delusion. Hulse has given us a lyrical, spare, intensely felt piece of writing that heralds the beginning of an important career in American fiction. Sarah Hulse. Our next finalist is Margaret Malone. The judges write, in plain-spoken American speech, with great delicacy and wit, the 9 stories in Margaret Malone's People Like You constantly beguile and surprise. With Chekhov, they share both compassion and brevity, They share with Carver and Beattie a confidence in the unforced sentiment of unadorned prose, and in their matter-of-fact humor, which is often laugh-out-loud funny, they tap a long tradition of American humorists stretching from Mark Twain to Lorrie Moore. What sets them apart are Malone's protagonists, dark, troubled women unafraid to puncture the pieties or to confront the void. 3 of these stories involve a beleaguered wife named Cheryl, whose life gains real emotional heft despite the often absurd predicaments that she finds herself in, predicaments that look and feel all too much like real life. That is the great pleasure here. These artful stories have the force of truth in every line. Margaret Malone. And finally, our winner is Ottessa Moshfegh. Ottessa Moshfegh's Eileen creates an almost unbearable tension, relieved by the sly and very dark humor that securely binds its readers to a dutiful daughter who seethes with persistent loathing and a determination to escape it. Written with a stunning self-assurance, the novel has both a commanding narrative momentum and a disarmingly quiet precision of detail that make it vibrate on the page. Deeply disturbing, it is equally uncompromising in its refusal to indulge in easier solutions to profound problems. With a daring prowess, Eileen also demonstrates a thrilling promise. Ottessa Moshfegh. Somebody's next.
It's me. Right? It's me. It's my turn, right? Hi. Thank you so much for this award. It really means a lot to me. I would like to thank Karen Wolf and Helen Atwan, who've been so sweet and helpful, and to the Hemingways, Patrick and Carol especially. It's so nice to meet you. And anyway, this is just a huge honor. I'm feeling very lucky right now. And congratulations to the other honorees. So I've been asked to read a little bit from the book. I'm just going to read very briefly from the opening so that you can hear what Eileen sounds like and what kind of trouble she might get into. So this is Eileen. The book is set in 1964. I looked like a girl you'd expect to see on a city bus, reading some cloth-bound book from the library about plants or geography, perhaps wearing a net over my light brown hair. You might take me for a nursing student or a typist. Note the nervous hands, a foot tapping. I looked like nothing special. It's easy for me to imagine this girl, a strange, young, and mousy version of me, carrying an anonymous leather purse or eating from a small package of peanuts, rolling each one between her gloved fingers, sucking in her cheeks, staring anxiously out the window. The sunlight in the morning illuminated the thin down on my face, which I tried to cover with pressed powder, a shade too pink for my wan complexion. I was thin, my figure was jagged, my movements pointy and hesitant, my posture stiff. The terrain of my face was heavy with soft acne scars, blurring whatever delight or madness lay beneath that cold and deadly New England exterior. If I'd worn glasses, I could have passed for smart, but I was too impatient to be truly smart. You'd have expected me to enjoy the stillness of closed rooms, take comfort in dull silence, my gaze moving slowly across paper, walls, heavy curtains, thoughts never shifting from what my eyes identified: book, desk, tree, person. But I deplored silence. I deplored stillness. I hated almost everything. I was very unhappy and angry all the time. I tried to control myself, and that only made me more awkward, unhappier, and angrier. I was like Joan of Arc or Hamlet, but born into the wrong life, the life of a nobody, a waif, invisible. There's no better way to say it. I was not myself back then. I was someone else. I was Eileen. Thank you so much.
I'm Jennifer Haig, and I'm here to present the 2016 PEN New England Awards. First, I'd like to congratulate Ottessa, Moshfegh, and all the Hemingway finalists and honorees. When my own book won the PEN Hemingway 12 years ago, I remember having kind of a Cinderella feeling. I knew, even as it was happening, that it would probably be one of the best days of my life as a writer, and that has turned out to be true. What I did not know was that I would continue to benefit from having won that award for years to come. To win the PEN Hemingway is to have your work forever associated with the lineage of Ernest Hemingway. And for a young writer, this is a marvelous thing. Now on to business. I'm delighted to present the 2016 PEN New England Awards in fiction, nonfiction, and poetry. These awards are given to the year's best books by a New England author or with a New England subject. As any past winner can tell you, what makes this award so meaningful is the extraordinary density of literary talent in our region. For as long as there's been an America, New England has been home to writers. We are the land of John Updike and John Cheever, Sylvia Plath and Anne Sexton, Frederick Douglass and Henry David Thoreau. To say a book is the best by a New England writer is saying a great deal indeed. The 2016 PEN New England Award in fiction was judged by Dana Spiotta, who has taken time out from her book tour for the Innocents to be here with us today. It's been an exceptionally strong year for fiction in New England. This year's award goes to one of my personal icons, the great Jim Shepard, for his unforgettable novel, The Book of Aron. In her citation, Dana Spiotta writes, Jim Shepard's The Book of Aron is a devastating, beautifully written novel about one particular boy in the Warsaw Ghetto in 1942. By showing us the relentless and visceral details of Aron's suffering, from terrible hunger to the daily torture of cold, filth, and lice, to witnessing the slow death of his mother from typhus, this novel takes the overwhelming enormity of Nazi cruelty and brings it to an achingly specific human point. Aron is self-deprecating and resourceful, yet still unaware of his own capacity. We are able to see his profound innocence despite his mistakes, that we know the terrible, brutal outcome only makes his struggle to endure more affecting and implicating. Like all great historical fiction, The Book of Aron looks to the past, but also interrogates the present. And in doing so, this unsentimental, emotionally raw book leaves you weeping for every child everywhere whom we have failed to protect. Congratulations, Jim Shepard.
Thank you, Dana, and Karen, and Jennifer, and Josh, and Mark, and Anthony, and the Hemingway family, and everyone at PEN New England who made this celebration possible. As I tell my students, for most writers, there's no magic threshold you pass after which you've eradicated doubts about your own worthiness, especially given that mostly what you're doing when you're engaged in this kind of writing is confronting your own limitations. But moments like these in which you feel ratified by peers you admire, peers so fiercely intelligent and passionate about what we do, those moments are wonderful for generating not only a heartening sense of accomplishment, but also, when you think about it, all the superb books that had to be passed over in order to honor yours, of renewed humility. Moments like these, in other words, remind me that what we're doing when we're writing is searching for that more ideal version of ourselves, that version that is more willing to put in the hard work of making sense of the world, and is more likely then to become more capacious when it comes to empathy and more even-handed when it comes to compassion. Thank you again for all of this honor. Thank you.
The PEN New England Award in Nonfiction this year goes to Rinker for his book, The Oregon Trail. This year's judge, come on. This year's judge was Anthony Swafford, who could not be with us today. But here's what he had to say about this remarkable book. The Oregon Trail is a masterly hybrid. Rinker blends autobiography, history of the West, and family memoir into a compelling and deeply humane narrative following he and his lovable brother as they drive a mule team and wagon across ruts that hadn't been followed continuously in over a century. His love of animals and nature and disdain for RV travelers is infectious and often hilarious. With deft storytelling and rehistoricizing, he unmasks the brutality and devilishness of Americans and the American experience, from our originating ethnic cleansing of native tribes to the current methamphetamine scourge that marks and mars the Oregon Trail. Whatever conveyance Rinker chooses to tell his next story, we should all buy advance tickets now. Congratulations, Rinker
This is a fine moment for me, and I want to thank the PEN New England, all the great people under Jofi Ferrari Adler at Simon & Schuster who did such a great job with this book, and my agent, Sloan Harris. There's a nice rounding back for me here today because I grew up among the other eccentricities of my upbringing, which I write a lot about in this book. My parents had this infallible instinct for settling in the right place, so we had this big old horse farm in northern New Jersey, and they were Democrats and members of PEN. My dad was a publisher in New York. He was very devoted to PEN. And this was, in as far as you could see for 30 or 40 miles, the only neighbors were Republicans. So the reason I feel so emotional right now about PEN is I remember one time, my dad was always, it seemed like it was artists and writers in Latin America and artists and writers and scientists imprisoned in the Soviet Union. This was in the 60s now, that my dad was so concerned about. And I'll just never forget that one night where I made the huge mistake of inviting this girlfriend home to dinner. And all I can tell you, and my feelings about PEN since then have been, she left with a much greater knowledge of writers in jail in the Soviet Union. My father explained to her, it took him a while to explain to her what the word gulag meant. And she's this beautiful, rich Protestant girl going, oh yeah, And so I've changed my feelings now, and I'm very grateful to have received this award. Thank you.
At each year's ceremony, we ask one of the 3 PEN New England honorees to read from the winning book. This year, it's poetry's turn. This year's PEN New England Award goes to Reginald Dwayne Betts for his stunning collection, Bastards of the Reagan Era. In the words of Judge Mark Doty, it may be surprising to call this dire and urgent book elegant, but Reginald Dwayne Betts's Bastards of the Reagan Era is built of language hammered into such wrenching music, such artful lyric sequences that no other word will do. Threaded with the names of the lost, Sean and Malik, Quan and Mo, young men gone out into the maw of incarceration machine designed to take black men out of our cities, out of circulation, out of the way. These poems of sorrow and slow-burning fury hold at their core the deepest love for the erased and the discarded. Betts has written an indelible lament for a generation, a necessary book for this American moment. Congratulations, Reginald Dwayne Betts.
So it's an honor to be here. It's actually, you don't get many moments like this, and I think everybody has already said it, but when you start right, you never expect to win an award like this. You actually never expect to win any awards. And so thank you, PEN New England. Thank the Hemingway family. The other honor, I think, for me is that the first time I read Ernest Hemingway, I was in prison. And a lot of the book sort of covers some of that terrain, but the book kind of fails to cover what it actually means to have started at a place where the idea of writing a book was the furthest thing from my mind. And I only picked up Hemingway because somebody told me that to be a part of this literary tradition, this American tradition, meant that you had to read Hemingway. And it was just part of the course. It actually wasn't something that I did to hope to be able to speak about it in a moment like this. And so being able to speak about it in a moment like this is even sweeter because it makes me believe that there's a way where you could trump your own expectations. I should just say that the first time I was ever invited to do something, to speak publicly about literature and art in prison, was the PEN New England organization. This was roughly 10 years ago, and they brought me up here, and it was the first time somebody paid to put me on an airplane to say something. And I like to think that they knew that one day I would write a book and then I would be able to tell that story, but Richard Hoffman is a genius, but maybe he's not psychic. So I'll read 2 poems. My sons are in the audience. They aren't paying me any attention at all, but that is okay. I'm going to read the first poem in the collection, which is for them, and I'll read the last poem. My wife couldn't make it because she had some work to do to prepare for tomorrow, but she contributed, one, by letting me have time. Actually, I said, look, babe, I'd like to move to Massachusetts to write this book. I got this fellowship, and I think it'd be a great idea to move to New England. And she was like, okay, that sounds like a good idea. Let's go and get New England Patriot credit cards. And then she bought this shirt for me for the occasion and made sure that I wore it this morning. Elephants in the Fall, for Mackay and Miles. 1, Mackay Michael Zamir Betts. November's flame in that year of hard sunsets. Winter's plangency and days when my insomnia courted cognac. All our thoughts were beginnings, and you became the roundness that grew to a moon above your mother's hips. We waited without a name for your wonder, and 3 days after your birth, twice named you for the uncle you'll never meet. The names were questions. Micah, who resembles God. Michael, who reminds us of who is gone too soon. And we pronounce Micah as we wanted, Mackay, because like the kid from Clockers, we scrape fists and cuffs for the dreams of you. And now, when on most days your body is all blur and bustle, our song is how right we got it. When the light from that moon spilled out of your mother's belly, I tell you, you were smiling then, as if you knew you were the first song to find me worthy. 2, Miles Thelonious Betts, named after the trumpet, after the sound that comes from all the hurt and want that leads a man to turn his back to the world. We named you after Monk, too, because sometimes you have to stack legends in a single body already big enough for the sound of them. And we imagined that you gave us a different tune, a way to bang keys into each other until our lives filled with unexpected music. I hear you call me daddy in this land where my father's name is sometimes another word for grave, and I almost pause. It's the song that wants to unravel me. More crow than swan, I've always been so much cage and caged in. And all that changes when we square the M. This old riff on a shotgun marriage calls us back. Your mother's hand in mine in the shotgun is what we aim at the world that threatens. And I scoop you in my arms, and you are calling us again. All right, one more poem. What we know of horses. And when my brother says Swan Road is the world, he ignores boarded vacants, broken windows, displaces shattered glass. He tells me, believe the world is a tenement house, a pocket full of stones, a world of ghosts, and what's left of ash and smoke after each inhale. I visit now that a prison cell holds this world. Dead men circle every block we know. Thread this world with quotes from Psalms. The sorrows of death embrace me. Some trust in chariots and some in horses. They embrace metaphor, disbelieve gravity, breathe in a haunted world. And what of my brother? Running these streets, he was a horse, graceful, destined to be broken. Why admire horses? Why compare everything fast and beautiful to horses? My daddy's generation had a saying for men lost in the world. It was true of my uncle, my cousin, men strung out on horse, chasing a dragon, shivering with the memory of that stallion gone postal in their veins. Called them lost in place, with cities buried inside them, horses inside them stampeding. My brother put his faith in horse, and there's no map to find him now. He tells me he inhales the funk of men doing life and knows he is in hell, that he has dug his grave amongst bricks that embrace him. He, exile, will only rusted iron and bricks bracing his 200 pounds. Who admits this cage embraces him? History is written on the back of the horse broken by the world. We all in prison now. I stare at this man, my kin, ruined by embracing night. Call this place a horse collar and watch how it cuts in the skin, how the leather embraces all of our necks. Even as a visitor behind plate glass, I brace myself for cuffs. This ain't Swan Road. This burden placed on me, these memories of courtrooms and the places where bodies were found. And still, I want to stop and embrace my brother, to hold him close and pause to inhale the scent of prison, to tell him what I smell, what I inhale is still the body of a man. How can a man inhale so much violence and not change? I light my Newport, inhale, think on how his voice has changed. My man now a feral horse wearing kick chains, unable to sleep, always on guard, inhaling the air for prey as if he is still the predator. as if he can inhale death and keep on living. Death, the elephant in this world. I imagine the other men here, all in a world filled with a casket's aftermath. How much grief can you inhale? My brother tells me he prays at night. He wants to leave this place, but we know all his wild hours placed him in this mural of blood. His hunger placed him in C Block, cell 21. It suffocates, and nothing replaces time. You okay in here, I ask? But he's in a place only he knows. When he walks away, he embraces the kind of rage I fear. A man killed a man near him, placed on a gurney and rushed down the sidewalk, dead in a place where no one cares if you're breathing. To be a horse galloping away is what I want for him. He wants horse trundling through his scarred veins. Prison has taken the place of freedom even in his dreams. And I know this is not a world where none is lonely. And I know he has lost the world. And I know he believes this: I shut my eyes and all the world is dead. And I know that there is still a strip, a place that he believes is the world, Swan Road, where he can inhale and be free. Sometimes his cuffs are on my wrists, and I embrace the way they cut, as if I'm the one domesticated, a broken horse. Since I'm certain to never get this moment again, I want to just add my last 2 New England facts. The first poetry workshop I ever attended, like out of prison, the first time I left Maryland, it was to go to the Fine Arts Work Center with Marie Howe. The first poem I read, everybody in the audience said, "Stop, I can't understand a word you're saying." And then this book was published by Martha Rose and 4-Way Books, another New Englander, and I'm proud to be a part of 4-Way Books. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Sue Miller. I'm on the board of PEN New England, and I'm honored today to be introducing James Wood, who is our keynote speaker. A man who, as the cliche goes, needs no introduction, at least not to the great number of writers in the room. So I can be brief. I will be brief. I'll try to be brief. Best known as a critic, first at the British newspaper The Guardian, then at the New Republic, now at the New Yorker, as well as in numerous book-length works. James Wood is also a fiction writer himself, 1 novel, and a teacher, presently a teacher of the practice of literary criticism at Harvard University. And I think he's the first critic we've invited to be the keynote speaker at this celebratory event, which is perhaps a bit like the chickens inviting the fox into the hen house, or the sheep welcoming the wolf into the pen. But it's also apt, I think, because James Wood's reviewing and his critical writing seem to me to be, in the best sense, celebratory themselves, celebratory of fiction itself. Reading his work, I think we feel most of all his wish to share his enthusiasm for the form, if not always the instance, an enthusiasm born of far more reading than I've ever done or am likely to do, so that writers' names I've never heard of, books I would never have known about, are offered to me and to you, free of charge, along with the review or the discussion at hand. When he likes the work, James Wood is at pains to explain the reasons for his enthusiasm, his rationale, as it were, to present through a discussion of the work a notion of an aesthetic or even a moral framework for considering it, how it works, how it's having its effect on us, or not, how it's failing. He tells us what's not so great in a variety of subtle and elegant ways that he connects to his examination and consideration of how it's working or not, and why or not. Sometimes he makes me want to argue with him to tell him how wrong he is about some book or other that he loves and I don't, or about one that I love and he doesn't. He moves me often to an answering notion, then, of my own rationale, of my own take on a particular work, and perhaps on fiction in general, my own sense of what fiction is, of how it works. But today his assignment is simply to talk to us about something that interests him or excites him, connected with writing, with the writing life, with fiction, that frabjous and multifarious art. So he can't go wrong here, and we can't wait to hear what he has to say. The redoubtable James Wood.
Thank you very much. I think I could go wrong, actually, but I'll try not to. Thank you, Sue. Thank you, Helen. Thank you, Karim, for inviting me to speak today. And I second, third, or fourth all the rightful praise offered to the Hemingway family and to PEN New England. And also just want to add my praise for the prize winners here today. Ottessa, Moshfegh, S.M. Hulse, Margaret Malone, Jim Shepard, Reginald, Dwayne Betts, and Rinker Buck. I hope I'm not going to be too much like, you might remember Gabriel Conroy in Joyce's Story of the Dead, who fears that his after-dinner speech is a little too high-minded. I think I should have come with more jokes, but I'm saying something serious, I hope, so I hope the high-mindedness will be allowed, eager as you are I know, to get out of this room, I'm sure, and go to the exhibition. For novelists and short story writers, this is an age of extremes. On the one hand, there's an enormous production and consumption of fiction, from the Pulitzer Prize winner to a popular hybrid that might be renamed 50 Shades of Hunger Games. Fiction, from the most popular to the more rarefied, still retains a fair amount of its old prestige. On the other hand, I think we're living in an age that exhibits quite a lot of hostility to fiction writing and storytelling, even when, or especially when, it thinks it's praising fiction. This hostility, I think, comes in two large forms: utilitarianism and distraction. Both in different but overlapping ways menace the writing and reading of serious literature and seek to replace or minimize it. By utilitarianism, I really mean a many-headed monster that's part pragmatism, part neuroscience, part evolutionary biology, part social science. A monster that roars for its ransom while spewing data. Utilitarianism, as you know, constantly asks us to justify what we do in the name of usefulness, benefit, function. You read fiction, then justify it by proving that it makes you more empathetic. In 2013, some of you remember, the New York Times reported that recent research had shown that reading even a small amount of Chekhov is good for one's empathy. What was new about this study was that exposure to literary fiction, like Alice Munro or Chekhov, seemed to make people more empathetic than if they were exposed to popular fiction or even to nonfiction. Hey. Also striking by all accounts was the relatively short exposure required. Participants read for only 3 to 5 minutes before being asked to undergo various empathy tests, e.g. looking at photographs of people's eyes and working out their emotional states from the visual evidence. What's not to like? The better the fiction, the better the sympathy. It would be hard to find a neater emblem of capitalist America. 3 minutes of Chekhov, taken every day like a pill, will strengthen your empathy muscles. Science proves it. You believe in God, then science will either tell you that prayer has been proven to have healing powers, or evolutionary psychology will tell you that you're hardwired to believe in an illusory God. You teach literature or writing or philosophy, say, then don't be surprised if the government starts ranking universities and university departments by how much their graduates are earning by the age of 25. A newish movement, sometimes called the quantified self, offers to incorporate technology and wearable sensors so that all aspects of a person's daily life can be measured and processed: food intake, mood arousal, mental performance, blood oxygen, and so on. Future technology will perhaps allow for the proper measuring of our daily dose of 3 minutes of Chekhov reading. The popular application of such utilitarianism can be seen almost any week, alas, in a typical David Brooks column in the New York Times, wherein almost all choices and decisions to write poetry, to live in the suburbs, to marry at 29 rather than 19, to go and hear Bruce Springsteen live, are passed through a pragmatic prism. What does it do for me, and what does it do for the fabric and functioning of society? Do MRI machines show that certain parts of my brain loyally light up when I'm engaged like a good citizen in such activities? We live in an age when a well-known Harvard professor of psychology, a popular expert on happiness, can essentially shill on TV for Prudential mutual funds, and no one is very surprised or shocked about it. Let's make happiness work for us. At the same time, rapid advances in technology are making it harder and harder to summon the kind of concentrated attention on works of consummate literary achievement that are needed in order to do them justice. We're living in an age that Sherry Turkle has characterized as one of distributed presence. Fewer of us have the time or inclination needed to devote ourselves to a serious reading of any text. We consume in fragments, Instagramming, Snapchatting, scrolling, and apping our way through an overwhelmingly visual world. As nobody really writes letters any longer, so soon emails may be too wordy and bulky, doubtless to be supplanted by texting or perhaps just liking and unliking. The window has been replaced by the screen, and our world is dominated by these canny icons, from the smallest, which are rarely out of our hands, certainly out of mine, to the largest, the flawlessly born pixels in riverine flow of light in Times Square or Piccadilly Circus, the fluorescent gods and goddesses staring down in luminous surveillance from every cityscape. An abolition of privacy, surveillance, combines with a drastic intensification of privacy, everyone coddling his little relationship with his little device. Or to put it a bit differently, it's the abolition of privacy and the simultaneous privatization of privacy. Of course, just as there is serious and life-saving neuroscience, just as one day the balance of my life might well lie in the proper functioning of an MRI, so digital technology has liberated millions of lives. I'm not only grateful for the fruits of scientific advancement, I'm mindful of the fact that a great deal of technology is fundamentally morally neutral, and that to decry it is like complaining about electricity. Still, utilitarianism, I think, and digital distraction converge to enforce an overweening rhetoric of success. Both are natural allies of the language of business. The aim is always successful living, a successful life. The measure is success and the tools are empirical. We're always looking for what can be found, quantified, tabulated, proven, explained. Pragmatic utilitarianism provides the frame within which technology goes about its brilliant business, always promising to make our lives more efficient, quicker, more liberated, more informed, more healthy, and, if the Apple ads are to be believed, more individual, more beautiful, even more musical. Remember that ad about the song? What can we do as writers and readers of literature in a new age of triumphant utilitarianism and technological vainglory? What are the prospects for people like us? How do we ensure that literature stays vital and important? Perhaps we should consider this historical moment as offering, paradoxically, a great opportunity for literature as a site of concentration, critique, surplus, stillness at the eye of the storm. Here are a few ways in which literature might go about asserting itself, justifying itself, to borrow the language of utilitarianism. First, critique and resistance. It won't be lost on any keen reader of Dostoevsky that our age is in danger of repeating some of the crude utilitarianism of the 1850s, 1860s, and 1870s. We need to borrow, I think, some of the moral passion that drove Ruskin, Dickens, Arnold, Whitman, George Eliot, Tolstoy to take up arms against the ruthless industrial complexes of their age. In his novella, Notes from Underground, written in 1864, Dostoevsky fiercely engaged with Russian and British progressivism and meliorism. Is it true, he asked, that everything is getting better and better? To have explained everything about where we came from and how we function is not, said Dostoevsky, to know where we are going. And our massive technologies of knowledge cannot explain a great deal about the thwarted and self-thwarting mysteries of human motivation. For instance, says Dostoevsky's Underground Man, we don't always do what is in our best interests, because we don't always want to. Sometimes we want to harm our own self-interest, to sabotage ourselves, to live with a scandalous lack of pragmatic success. Maybe nowadays we seem to lack titanic figures like Tolstoy and George Eliot. Yet contemporary literature in recent years has powerfully mobilized itself against some of the political and technological presumptions of the age. Some of those writers are in this room. Others are people like Marilyn Robinson, David Foster Wallace, Don DeLillo, Jose Saramago, Teju Cole, Karl Ove Knausgaard, Michel Houellebecq. These writers don't agree with each other. Variously, they mount their critiques from religious or leftist or conservative positions. But they are fierce resistors, nonetheless. We feel their writing to have a force of moral outrage. They appreciate and explore our age, but when necessary, they unlike it. Second, concentration. By this I mean that one antidote, obviously, to distraction is an insistence on concentration, and that art insists thus by virtue of having form. This might sound like a trivial or automatic attribute. Of course, books have form, but I think it's crucial. Life is essentially formless, and technology, though full of cute, discrete objects, is essentially formless too. It's protean. It has to be. It's about the process of becoming. It's proud of its built-in obsolescence. 5S is always becoming 6, 6 plus, 6S, 7, and so on. Technology dreams of infinity. It should do. More and more and more. Where do you want to go is its right and perpetual mantra. The question mark dangling enticingly. And notice that when video games are extolled for their fiction-making qualities, the emphasis is always on the multiplicity of options and choices. The game player, we told, can choose many possibilities from tempting menus. But literary form, while of course expansive and multiple, also has a certain negative power. It shows us where things stop. It places an almost sacred border around the artwork and says, this is not identical with the claims of the world. This is a space that demands a certain degree of strangeness, difference, supplication. Really, universally, human relations stop nowhere, said Henry James, of fictional form. And, he went on, the eternal problem of the artist is to draw a circle within which such relations merely appear to stop. That circle is form. And as Henry James understood, the stopping of an endless prolongation may be form's most important virtue. The place where everything seems to stop and seems to have its own perfect justification. And maybe that feeling is strongest in short stories and in poems, which have such concentrated emblems of form. One thing such form powerfully allows us to do is to measure the length and shape of our lives. Life is relatively formless, but written lives are more shapely. Without being too pious about it, I'd say there's something religious or perhaps liturgical about this life measuring. The Lord shall preserve thy going out and thy coming in, says the psalmist in Psalm 121. Fiction in particular gives us formal insight into the shape of someone's life. We can see the beginning and end of many fictional lives, their developments and errors, stasis and drift, and of course not just fiction, nonfiction too. How about that wonderful poem that Dwayne Betts just read, his second poem that we just heard. It does this in different ways, by sheer scope and size, the long peopled novel, full of many different lives, many beginnings and endings, but also by compression and concentration. The novella that radically compacts a single life from start to finish, as in The Death of Ivan Illich, or Stoner, or Dennis Johnson's Train Dreams, or Alice Munro's The Bear Came Over the Mountain. And partly by turning the present into past. Although we move forward through a story, the story is already complete. We hold it in our hands. Every time we return to a novella, or a novel, or a story we've already read, we affirm the strangely expansive but also negative power of fictional form, its ability to hold and animate and stop a life for our scrutiny. Third, unnecessary surplus. Against technological pragmatism with its insistence on what can be precisely measured, explained, justified, and of course, not decrying the existence or the importance of such measurement. We rely on it every single day when we cross a bridge or drive a car or go up in a plane. But against that tendency, art insists, I think, on the gratuitous, the inexplicable, the cloudy, the mysterious. I don't mean by this that storytelling doesn't clarify. Of course it does. I'm not arguing for mystification or superstition, so much as for a kind of margin of beauty, a hinterland of surplus, always more than is necessary or merely useful or merely functional. For many fiction writers, detail plays the role of the gratuitous, the extra, the thing in itself that is irreducible and intrinsic because it can't quite be accounted for or pragmatically justified. There's a moment early on in Madame Bovary where Flaubert describes how, when the window of Madame Bovary's house was open, villagers could hear her playing the piano. And Flaubert pauses to linger on one of those villagers. Quote, "The bailiff's clerk often stopped to listen as he passed on the road, bareheaded, shuffling along in slippers, holding in his hand the notice he was about to post." When I teach this book, I like to ask my students to explain why Flaubert stops to notice the bailiff's clerk. Why is he there? None of us, me included, can quite answer the question. None of us can account for the little surplus of detail, the spilling over, not just a clerk, but one who is bareheaded and shuffling along in slippers. Why bareheaded? Why in slippers? You could say that something pragmatically instructive can be learned from Emma Bovary's life, for sure. But what is the use of a detail like this? Literature is made up of millions of irreducible details. They stick out of the frieze of form like hands begging us to touch them. Fourth and finally, fictionality. Utilitarianism and pragmatism make use of the real, because the real, of course, is eminently usable. And on the other side, digital technology, because it's centered on the screen rather than on the page, tends to emphasize story making, perhaps, rather than storytelling, fantasy, video gaming, virtual reality experiments, and so on. Somewhere between the real and the purely hypothetical lies literary storytelling. That's to say, the narration of a story that is invented but not escapist, imagined but not fantastical, fabricated but not untruthful, made up but not a lie. What Thomas Mann once called the game of not quite. To the artist, wrote Thomas Mann, new experiences of truth are new incentives to the game, new possibilities of expression. He believes in them, he takes them seriously just so far as he needs in order to give them the fullest and profoundest expression. In all that, goes on Mann, the artist is very serious, serious even to tears, but yet not quite. That not quite seems important to me. It preserves the fictional in storytelling, reminds us that the artist offers something to us but also withdraws from us, finally refuses to give us everything, which is to say the artist refuses to make her story identical with the world. Close to the world, but not quite. Art is the nearest thing to life, said George Eliot. It's a mode of amplifying experience and extending our contact with our fellow men beyond the bounds of our personal lot. The nearest thing to life, but not the same thing as life. Our age has, in different ways, a terrible reality hunger, to adapt the title of an anti-fictional polemic by the writer David Shields. The artist of distinction, of course, feeds that reality hunger, but at the same time offers a kind of food on a special plate that will not quite feed that hunger either, that will not quite fit into the maw of the hungry, reality-reverencing, pragmatic, data-crunching monster. The artist sets down this slightly perplexing but very delicious food, and the reality monster looks at it and slinks away, provoked, bemused, and fittingly disappointed. Thank you.
Thank you, James Wood, for very thought-provoking and high-minded talk. I'm Stacy Bredhoff, Museum Curator for the Kennedy Library. The doors to the exhibition Ernest Hemingway, Between Two Wars, are about to open, and we hope you'll all join us downstairs. The exhibition is kind of a wild ride, taking us from Oak Park, Illinois, to the Italian battlefront during World War I, from Paris to Pamplona, from bullfights to safari, from Madrid under siege during the Spanish Civil War, and finally to the beaches of Normandy and the Hurtgen Forest during World War II. We'll see Hemingway's good luck charms, bullet fragments, his tourist maps and battle map, an old beat-up travel trunk, his silver drinking flask. Seeing these things brings us closer to him, somehow makes him more real to us, which is the special magic of historical artifacts. But ultimately, the show is about Hemingway as a writer. Getting the words right is how Hemingway explained his 47 attempts to write the final page to A Farewell to Arms. You can read 9 of them downstairs. I wish we had the walls to show them all, because the effort alone is heroic. He was tireless and courageous in his work to bring an actual life experience to the reader. In 1958, 33 years after he wrote that letter to his father that Jay Basanko read earlier this afternoon, he hadn't really changed the way he described his life's work. He said, "I have tried to eliminate everything unnecessary to conveying experience to the reader, so that after he or she has read something, it will become a part of his or her experience and seem actually to have happened. This is very hard to do, and I've worked at it very hard." Throughout the gallery at every turn is evidence of that hard work. Before we adjourn, I would like to add my heartfelt thanks to the co-curators of this exhibition, Declan Kiley, curator at the Morgan Library and Museum in New York, where the show had a successful run last fall, and to Susan Rind, former Hemingway curator here at the Kennedy Library. We're so pleased that they're both here with us today. They selected the materials and created the narrative that chronicles one of the most dynamic creative periods in Hemingway's life. We adopted that narrative and adapted it to our larger gallery, showcasing additional photographs and artifacts that bring us into the world Hemingway inhabited. Exhibit designer Amy Foreman is also here with us today, was the lead designer on a very dynamic installation you'll see downstairs. And finally, it was Tom Putnam, former director of the Kennedy Library, who was instrumental in establishing the partnership between the Kennedy Library and the Morgan Library that brought this project to fruition. Working with the Hemingway collection has been a privilege and an honor for all of us. We hope that you enjoy this exhibition as much as we have enjoyed producing it. To close these proceedings, it seemed right for President Kennedy to have the final word, so I'll read from a statement that he made in 1961 upon the death of Ernest Hemingway. "Few Americans have had a greater impact on the emotions and attitudes of the American people than Ernest Hemingway. From his first emergence as one of the bright literary stars in Paris during the 20s, as chronicler of the lost generation which he was to immortalize, he almost single-handedly transformed the literature and the ways of thought of men and women in every country in the world." We thank you all for coming this afternoon, and please join us downstairs.